Imagine toxins and contaminants running through your taps. Imagine bathing in it. Imagine giving a glass of it to your child. Imagine that here, in Canada. For many Indigenous communities, this is the reality. When this issue is brought to the attention of Canadians, focus typically falls on the existence of drinking water advisories. However, the criteria for drinking water advisories does not capture the full scope of unclean water problems. Data from a national database reveals that overall risk scores that indicate health risks associated with unclean water have not changed much since 2015. Despite current government action plans to eliminate long-term drinking water advisories, many Indigenous communities have serious water issues without ever having been issued a drinking water advisory. In order to drink, wash, cook, bathe, and perform other hygienic practices, Indigenous people have higher costs financially, as well as higher costs due to time and energy constraints. Unclean and unsafe water leads to sick people. Direct health implications include, but are not limited to, increased risks of cancers, depression, and skin infections. Spiritual health is affected as well, as some Indigenous groups view water as a sacred symbol of life. In terms of what perpetuates the system, it begins in the period of colonialism, and particularly when the remote locations of reserves were established. Remoteness contributes to water problems in multiple ways. Along with other past actions such as attempts at cultural genocide and disputes on land claims, the oppression of Indigenous peoples is part of the history of Canada. Actors in the private sector, especially in the extraction industries, also exacerbate the problem through producing pollution or reducing the available supply of water. The federal government has the responsibility to ensure the well-being of Indigenous people and their lands. Yet problems persist in the bureaucratic delays, avoidance of accountability, and a lack of consideration for Indigenous knowledge and values. Our research has also revealed that financial support, infrastructure, and training, federally provided, has proved to be inadequate. A lack of public awareness and misconceptions of Indigenous people are also part of the problem, as it entails that issues get inconsistent support from the wider public.
All of these key findings helps maintain a system that perpetuates the water crisis. Now we'll move on to key findings. One of the most important key findings from our research was that the removal of drinking water advisories alone cannot solve the water crisis. This is particularly worth noting because it was the exact opposite of our initial assumptions. When we began our research, we used the removal of DWAs to measure the success of the government clean water initiatives, and as the end goal for all Indigenous reserves experiencing the water crisis. However, as we previously stated, even when the DWAs have been removed, many Indigenous communities will still suffer poor water quality and accessibility issues. This demonstrates that DWAs are simply a part of the bigger issue, and their removal is not a sufficient indicator that a community's water crisis has been solved.
The main lessons we've learned from our research is that the relationship between the Canadian federal government and the Indigenous people is still strained, the current funding from the federal government is insufficient, and several actors need to be involved in order to provide a sustainable solution. The strained relationship is a significant factor that exacerbates the water issue because communication, mutual respect, and a better understanding of lived Indigenous experiences are missing. Indigenous communities also still lack decision-making power. Furthermore, despite the billions of dollars already spent on the water issue, funding from the federal government still falls short of what is actually required to fix the water crisis for good. While the role of the federal government is key, we cannot only rely on the government's efforts to solve this problem. As highlighted previously, several other actors are involved in the system, which include extraction companies and mainstream media that all uniquely contribute to the issue. Efforts are required from these actors, and more, in order to address those unique contributing factors. However, Indigenous people themselves need to be at the center of these efforts. Therefore, a favorable solution will arise from more respectful and successful relationships between all actors involved that meaningfully incorporates Indigenous perspectives, voices, and values throughout the problem-solving process. Moving forward, we should ask how these actors can help facilitate Indigenous-led clean water initiatives. Systems thinking has allowed us to identify and connect the relationships between all of these different actors, which made us realize that there are several points of levers for change within a system, and not just one. We leave you, the audience, with one final thought. If you have clean water, then why don't they?
Here in Canada, we generate the most waste per capita in the world. At a municipal level, each Canadian generates 2.7 kilograms of waste every day. I'm Kirolis, and I would like to outline the waste crisis. Half of what we send to landfills is organic and can be composted instead. Globally, waste is projected to double by 2025 relative to 2015. Landfills are the third leading emitter of methane, a greenhouse gas that captures 70 times more heat than CO2. Recyclable plastics that's contaminated due to our poor sorting leaches toxins into local water supplies. This is causing health issues that are so severe that China has banned imports of recyclable plastics from Western countries. Globally, we waste 1/3 of the food we produce, yet 1 in 9 people are undernourished. This is killing 3.1 million children every year. Clearly, waste contributes to the climate crisis, severe health issues, and world hunger. Over the past decades, we have come up with feel-good solutions such as recycling and donating. But these things don't work at all. Only 9% of what Canadians put in a recycling bin actually gets recycled. And we will be recycling even less now that China has banned our recyclable plastic. And our local recycling industry is so underdeveloped. Donating is even seen as an alternative. But 2/3 of what people donate to thrift stores is never sold and actually goes to landfills because of its poor quality. Everything has an end life and goes to landfill eventually. Now, my teammate Nell will describe a key insight that we feel is critical in addressing the waste crisis.
So it turns out that simply talking about waste sorting leads to significant waste reduction. The academic literature and our research interviews both indicate that by helping people take the first step in consciously sorting their waste, they often end up reducing their waste all on their own. To facilitate this, we need a top-down commitment coupled with grassroots education campaigns. The top-down commitment must include policy incentives, effective regulation, and improved infrastructure to give people the tools that they need. We have tested this model at Concordia University in Montreal. Waste Not Want Not began in 2016 as a collaboration between students, professors, and the administration. Students and professors helped to lead an education campaign together, while the administration focuses on improving composting infrastructure. Since the collaboration began, the Concordia community has doubled its annual composting rates and has saved about 2 months' worth of garbage per person each year. And next, Monica will talk about the lessons we've learned.
One key assumption that we had to let go of is the idea that current mainstream solutions like recycling and donating work or are even plausible. Working with the Map the System model has challenged our worldview by illuminating that this is truly a social issue that cannot be solved with some sleek technological approach. The waste crisis requires a socially systemic solution that motivates consumption reduction. Professionally, we learned that our proposed model is reliant on trust. Even in a 2-person team, collaborators must base their relationships on transparency in order to work together effectively. This is even more magnified at the community level because anything that appears like greenwashing blunts the effectiveness of all efforts. So it's vital that relationships be based on transparency between all stakeholders. Additionally, seeing other organizations as potential partners rather than competitors results in more powerful teams of problem solvers. I recently joined the Waste Not team, and I was initially skeptical about solving a problem this complex with a systematic approach. But seeing and understanding the data was very powerful. This points to an educational lesson learned that highlights the challenge of navigating people's assumptions and the importance of communicating the data to the wider community in an effective way. On a personal level, our team initially felt daunted thinking about the waste crisis from a systems perspective. How can we, a small team of students, possibly make a dent? Climate anxiety is shared around the world. 85% of people feel guilty about the waste that they generate. However, this project has taught us that if we simply focus on helping people take the first step by properly sorting waste, that they will take the bigger steps of reducing waste on their own. And this gives us confidence that the waste crisis is manageable and that by working together, we can truly have a meaningful impact.
Hello, everybody. We're here today to talk about the clean water crisis around the world and in Madagascar. And I'm here alongside my colleagues, Kathleen and Shashini, and we are proud to be able to represent Wilfrid Laurier University at the 2020 Map the System Canadian Finals. When you think about the top, most pressing issues facing humanity, you might say climate change, poverty, or a pandemic like the coronavirus. And while those are all significant challenges, we would say that the number one issue facing the world is access to safe, clean drinking water, a basic necessity that is hard to come by for hundreds of millions of people across the world.
So why focus on the water crisis? With the increase of population and climate change, there's a high chance of disasters like floods, oil spills, and earthquakes happening that will contaminate water. If we help provide access to clean water, not only are we going to save significant lives, but we are also going to gain knowledge and discover new ways on how to evenly distribute, preserve, and access clean water when disasters occur. Having access to clean water also prevents diseases, undiscovered diseases that may even prevent a pandemic. In addition, having access to clean water has direct and indirect links to an improved economy because there will be healthier kids that are able to go to school.
Almost all countries, starting from underdeveloped countries like Madagascar to well-developed countries like Canada, currently faces this issue. 1 million people die each year from water and sanitation-related diseases. Also, a shocking 80% of the diseases in developing countries are linked with poor water and sanitation conditions. In low and middle-income countries, not just households but also workplaces, schools, and health institutions lack water and sanitation facilities. This affects many economical aspects, such as education, healthcare, and productivity, which leads to billions of dollars of losses each year globally.
Why did we choose to specifically focus on Madagascar in our research? Well, there's many reasons. And first of all, it's because Madagascar's water crisis situation is as bad as any country in the world, with 88% of the Malagasy people lacking proper and reliable access to clean drinking water. And with water being such a basic physiological need just to survive, the lack of clean drinking water in Madagascar has exacerbated many other issues, including economic development and access to education. We also focused on Madagascar because of how unique and isolated it is as a country. Many countries struggling with clean water are located in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia, neighbored by several other countries and with easier access to NGO resources and support. But Madagascar is all alone, isolated in the southern Indian Ocean and far away from help, with possibly one of the most unique ecosystems on Earth, which can either be used to their advantage or disadvantage. And lastly, we wanted to learn how different key stakeholders would work together in an isolated country like Madagascar.
4 major NGOs helping Madagascar, and all of them are successful but only to a certain degree. Number 1, WaterAid has brought clean water to the citizens. However, exporting clean water from one country to another is not efficient. Number 2, the USAID educated their communities on proper hygiene. However, access to clean water is needed in order to implement these proper hygiene. Number 3, UNICEF had even installed pipelines. However, rural parts of Madagascar have very poor infrastructure that installing a pipeline would be very difficult. And number 4, the WHO has collaborated with the government to develop the National WASH program. We figured that having Madagascar work with the NGOs is like outsourcing the problem, and that the real issue lies in the government not taking their water crisis seriously. Therefore, to help their water crisis is to address the government to invest in their infrastructure and imposing regulations. In addition, help Madagascar utilize their own natural resources to create a solution such as the Work-It Tower.
Based on our research, we identified some major gaps in the system that act as obstacles to the current solutions developed. Lack of funding, lack of connection to rural areas, and being isolated as an island are the key reasons why this problem is persistent in Madagascar, and we learned several lessons through analyzing those gaps. Due to the existence of chronic poverty in the country, implementation of costly projects is ineffective because the Malagasy government cannot fund those projects. Projects like building tap lines consume a lot of funds and time, especially in rural parts of Madagascar, because those areas have severe infrastructure deficits and poor transport links. Investing in physical storage is also inefficient because some parts of Madagascar face climatic challenges like cyclones very often. We have understood that based on the severity of this issue in the country, an urgent step needs to be taken, at least to provide a temporary solution to the communities that are most affected, and the government of Madagascar should invest in the long-term infrastructure developments with the help of NGOs.
We all need clean water, but access to clean water depends on us.
Hi everybody, it's Nasrina Turi. I and my teammates, the Insectivores team, are going to present our project with the title of Insect as a Source of Protein, which is prepared for Map the System contest. In this work, we have studied the strategies to expand the edible insect market in North America. Do you know Mother Earth's kitchen doesn't have the capacity to make enough burgers for 7 billion people who are in the line? What is your opinion on considering edible insects as an alternative food source, especially for the new generation? So, what is the main challenge in this project? According to FAO report, by 2050, the world's population is predicted to increase to 9 billion and also food demand will increase by 70%. As can be seen from the figure, producing cow, pig and chicken meat are required more amount of land, feed and water than insects. Additionally, the figure in the left side of the page illustrates the global warming potential of different food production that the mealworm emits the least CO2. Trading insects as a source of food and feed plays an economic role in gross national income, and also establishing local insect farms provide job opportunities in rural areas. According to the figure in the top of page, crickets have high protein content and they are a source of energy, fat, minerals and vitamins. The insects and their processing as an alternative food source have significant positive impacts on the environment. First, insects require less land and water but still show high feed conversion efficiency. Second, as we can see in the figure, insects emit fewer greenhouse gases and less ammonia. So finally, despite all these benefits of insect-based foods and all negative environmental impacts of animal meat products, why people in North America are reluctant to consume insects as food?
Well, this slide is dedicated to the identified contributing factors, health problem that we have divided them into three categories: anti-nutrient properties, allergens, and microbial risk. Mass production problem that the most important limitation is the high cost of its processing due to manual labor requirement, lack of explicit rules and regulation in North America, lack of consumer acceptability mainly due to consumers are uncertain about consequence of experiencing insect-based food, marketing problem according to our survey. Lack of advertising leads to lack of knowledge, also unavailability in local market, lack of cookbooks and restaurants are the other component of marketing problem. But what are the existing solutions? Considering some treatment like blanching step to modify health issue, integrated farming and mechanization to improve production line, legislating simplify rules and regulation, and considering some tips like describing cooking procedure by chefs to enhance social acceptance.
We identified 4 factors that directly affect the limited consumption of insects in North America. They are the limited data on health issues, lack of public awareness, lack of enough governmental policies, and limited marketing and availability of products and restaurants. For the first gap, it is recommended to allocate funds and scholarships for conducting extensive studies. In order to raise public awareness, it is suggested to educate people about positive nutritional, economic, and environmental impacts of consuming insects. To do so, considering course components in the universities and schools and different ways of advertisements will be beneficial. In order to fill the third gap, it is recommended that government consider some subsidies for farming, and also global and federal agencies establish restricted rules and standards. To resolve the limited marketing problem, it is proposed to enhance advertising techniques and distribute products extensively in supermarkets. According to this study, the most significant reason that prevents people from consuming insects is that they think insects are disgusting. This point of view could be changed by informing people of positive environmental and nutritional effects of consuming insects, as it happened to our team members. Increasing consumer acceptability leads to an increase in demand, which in turn results in mass production and a decrease in price. Now, would you convince to try insects and add them to your diet? Thank you.
To explain the sociocultural impacts of the Canadian water crisis, I wrote a story that combines imagination, historical events, research, interviews, and my own personal experience as a nursing student to illuminate the devastating impact this crisis has on Canadian families. Laura is scared. She's 6 years old and she's been in the hospital for 2 weeks. The doctors and nurses are wearing masks because of a pandemic, and Laura can't see if they're smiling. They tell Laura's mom that when she was born, her brain wasn't fully formed and the nerves that should control her bladder don't, resulting in recurring urinary tract infections and other developmental disabilities. Now, Laura has to drink at least 2 liters of water a day, and the nurse shows her mom how to use a catheter to empty her bladder, which will happen 5 times every day forever. Laura's mom is crying, and all Laura can think about is going home. Home for Laura is a small First Nations reserve in Alberta where she lives with her siblings, mom, and grandparents. Laura's ancestors chose the land because of its rich biodiversity where they could farm, fish, hunt, and gather. Laura's grandmother tells her stories of her childhood canoeing and holding cultural ceremonies at the lake, and Laura dreams of catching a fish big enough to feed her whole community. But the signs at the lake say the fish isn't safe to eat. Her community has faced many hardships because their land is geographically isolated from major urban developments, too far north to have a productive growing season, and there are limited jobs. Alberta's oil industry provided some jobs, but also devastated the environment, and with the economic downturn, many companies have abandoned their sites, leaving a mess behind. Laura knows the tap water at home isn't safe to drink without boiling it first. The water from the polluted lake goes into the water treatment facility, then a truck brings the water to Laura's family well. But sometimes the truck driver gets sick, or it's so cold the truck doesn't start and the well runs dry. Without running water, Laura drinks juice, and her mom has to use hand sanitizer before helping Laura with her catheter. Her mom tried to buy bottled water, but the only store on their reserve sells 1 liter for $5, and she had to quit her part-time job to care for Laura. After a while, the hand sanitizer runs out, and Laura starts having the same pains that put her in the hospital the first time. Laura's mom drives 2 hours to the nearest doctor's office, where a non-Indigenous nurse assesses Laura and observes a history of frequent UTIs and blood results that could indicate early type 2 diabetes. The nurse, who isn't educated on the inequalities experienced by First Nations people, assumes Laura is being neglected and contacts Child and Family Services. Laura is removed from her home and placed in foster care, causing her family and her community significant distress. If only Laura's community had access to safe drinking water. Canada is home to the world's 3rd largest supply of fresh water, and yet there are over 600 communities without access to water that is safe enough to drink. Unsafe drinking water is 5 times more likely to happen in First Nations communities. The World Health Organization states that poor and unequal living conditions are the consequence of poor social policies and programs, unfair economic arrangements, and bad politics. I believe this is the reason that Canada's Indigenous people have significantly higher rates of diseases such as tuberculosis, waterborne illnesses, and type 2 diabetes than non-Indigenous Canadians. First Nations children represent only 7.7% of all Canadian children, yet make up 52% of children in the foster care system. First Nations communities do not have access to the same amenities as other communities because they have been historically mistreated by government through policies and laws. A lack of federal environmental protections has prioritized industrial development over the basic needs of Indigenous people, and the fragmented control of resources between federal and provincial governments has created a gap in which services to First Nations people has fallen. Over the past 20 years, the federal government has spent over $5 billion attempting to bring safe water to all communities, proving that this is not only a financial issue. Change will not occur without collaboration in which First Nations communities are recognized as equal partners in finding solutions to the problems that primarily affect them. Accountability, the current division between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people must be addressed. Provincial and federal governments must have joint responsibility to provide basic services for all Canadians. And cooperation. In nursing, we have a saying about promoting patient independence, which is to do with, not to do for. This could be adopted to facilitate working with First Nations communities to address the many inequalities they experience rather than continuing to make decisions for them. When I started this project, it was important for me to share the impacts this crisis had on First Nations people. Now, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is vital. We are watching a virus ravage the entire human population and are encouraged to distance ourselves from others and wash our hands. Those actions are impossible with the substandard living conditions in some Canadian communities. This project has reaffirmed for me the gaps that exist within many of our social systems. I hope through this pandemic, the collective Canadian society will begin to see the human beings who are disproportionately affected and start to help them to bridge those gaps. We need to demand equality for First Nations people.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bo, and I'm part of Team Holocene at Memorial University. Our work was to apply systems thinking approach to the flooding crisis in Canada. The Federal Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangements Program is $1 billion annually, and 75% of this cost is attributed to flood events. Furthermore, according to Public Safety Canada, 2.2 million Canadian residential properties out of 10 million are vulnerable to overland flooding, and as we speak, there's flooding in Fort McMurray forcing 15,000 to evacuate. Our core motivation to take part in this challenge stems from events last year where my country of origin, Zimbabwe, was hit by the third most destructive cyclone in the southern hemisphere, and a month after that we witnessed flooding here at home in Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick. Our team is comprised of two individuals from the applied sciences background. Ali is completing his PhD in computer science, and I have an engineering background and currently completing my master's. I also won the Singularity U Canada Global Impact Challenge Award last year, focused on innovative solutions to solve the world's most pressing challenges. There are multiple factors that affect the severity and frequency of floods in Canada, and it is now a well-known fact that flooding events are on the rise in Canada. According to government records, flooding disasters have led to over $5 billion in economic losses, have affected 1.3 million people directly and indirectly, and have profound psychosocial effects on communities across the nation. But to truly understand the dynamics, challenges, we identify the stakeholders, their interrelationships and interactions. The first functional group are working groups who work as frontline workers involved in prevention, response, preparedness, and recovery. They in turn inform the top half, comprised of senior officials responsible for emergency management all the way up to federal, provincial, and territorial ministers. However, it is our contention that the emergency management status quo is possibly unknowingly maintained by this group, who act as a conduit between the frontline workers and senior policy makers and enforcers. So to recap, we believe that this systems thinking exercise may best inform the second tier to ensure the safety of all Canadians. We then mapped out the current challenges, gaps, levers, and then prescribed solutions. We found three primary problems, and Ali will take you through each one of them and the solutions we identified.
Thanks, Bo. According to the Insurance Bureau of Canada's Costs of Climate Adaptation report, municipalities are vulnerable due to the poor state of Canada's aging infrastructure. We found that there is a lack of legal, sociocultural, and financial policies that focus on mitigating the impacts of flooding. We also found that integrated operations and multi-stakeholder engagement is not yet at a desired level to institute governance policies at the federal, provincial, and territorial levels. We then identified three solutions, taking into consideration institutional operations and infrastructure factors. The federal government has begun comprehensive governance and policy framework strategies to propose adaptation for urban flooding resilience by 2030. We also found that some communities across Canada are taking proactive, self-directed steps through asset-based community development initiatives that focus on mobilizing community assets to enhance resiliency and preparedness. And with faster flooding detection and better infrastructure resilience projects, we enhance the inherent strength of built, natural, and virtual systems. We found 3 gaps, factoring in collaboration, capital, and resilience. Due to the limited collaboration, we felt that the senior officials and disaster risk reduction advisory community should have more engagement with frontline workers to inform policy and governance. Also, a comprehensive effort to invest in infrastructure and technology to improve disaster resilience is needed. Finally, a defined substantive policy that identifies resilience indicators that has climate change and flooding considerations is required. This exercise allowed us to establish the setting and context of the flooding problem in Canada. Furthermore, we understood more about the factors, actors, and limitations impacting the flooding crisis in Canada. We'd like to acknowledge the following private, government, and non-government organizations and individuals who shared valuable insight. Millions of Canadians, our families, our friends, our loved ones are at risk, and the time to act is now.
We are a well-rounded, interdisciplinary team interested in creating meaningful and lasting social change. We are all interested in different social issues, but a common point they all share is that they all interact with charity at some point. Because of this, we decided to explore charity deeper. After all, isn't that where you're supposed to go to solve social problems?
The mental models, history, policies and structures, and human factors have established a Canadian charity system that is unable to keep up with demands for services. The incredible complexity and interconnected nature of this system results in unsustainable path dependency and deeply rooted power dynamics that amplify the issue and handicap charities from reaching their goals. Our mental models and ideologies inform how everything in our system is established and maintained. For example, we do not tolerate charities making a profit, being well compensated, or spending money on anything other than creating immediate results. The history and legacy of Canadian charity has created a 400-year-old system, trapping Canada in an Elizabethan era. For example, it is a charitable purpose to relieve poverty, but not to prevent it. Policies and structures such as short-term government contracts for charitable funding create a heavy reliance on funders, leaving charities unable to advocate for themselves, innovate, or scale. Social impact and productivity is also difficult for charities to evaluate. Human factors affect how we behave with charities. We demand reciprocity, relevance, and results. We are also risk-averse to anything that does not deliver these three things. This is just a preview of the complex system we're about to dive into. Picture this. You're on a boat floating in a sea of social issues. Water is starting to get into your boat. You have to act quickly. You start bailing out the boat. It's what you're expected to do. It's what you've always done. After all, no one wants to drown, but you can't bail out the boat forever. This is simple to what happens in Canadian charity. We can't keep fixing symptoms of problems. We solve problems at their root. We need to plug the hole in the boat.
The pressure to meet funders' expectations leaves charities unable to change and adapt due to their reliance on funders. Additionally, we build our structures and regulations to align with those mental models, deepening the path dependency. Breaking out is essential for innovation, but something that most charities have yet to do. Leaving the feedback loop is seen as a risk because charities deal with delicate situations, sometimes even life or death for the people they help. While investing in programming costs affords opportunities for innovation, funders prefer to see their money contributed directly to tangible results. When the results are not immediate and measurable, this disparity can create distrust between funders and charities.
What exactly are all of these expectations that funders hold, that we as a society hold? We don't let charities seek compensation the way that businesses do, stunting charities' capacity to innovate and save for the future.
We are intolerant of charities spending any money on sales or growing their market share. This impacts the ability of charity to be competitive for funders' money and the overall revenue a charity can bring in to help its cause. We are apprehensive to investing in new ideas or revenue sources because these overhead costs are seen as a risk to serving people in need. This fear of overhead has many implications, including making it harder for charities to scale, innovate, or grow their market share. We expect results to be immediate, even if problems take time to solve. We end up favoring short-term fixes to symptoms of a problem rather than solving it at its root because it's more attractive to say that you fed 5 families rather than help somebody leave an abusive situation. Any sort of profit generated from a solution that solves a social problem is considered dirty, as if the organization has no integrity. This makes attracting talent and human capital that would benefit the charity difficult, since it's easier to donate to an issue than to take a major pay cut.
Now, more than ever, we need to ensure our systems are resilient and responsive, as a waterfall of demand is going to start flooding our system. So, how do we keep our boat afloat? First, changing mental models of charities, because they directly impact our interactions with, expectations of, and structures surrounding the charity system. This could look like utilizing social innovation labs and creative spaces to challenge existing ways of thinking or sharing insights between organizations. Second, a transition towards beneficiary-centric models adds value by putting the focus on the people in the system instead of managing expectations, politics, and finances. Strategies for this include co-creation and human-centered design. Third, providing flexibility and security for charities opens up avenues for innovation, allowing for sustainable long-term solutions. Potential strategies include equity financing, social investment funds, and increased freedom and flexibility in charity spending. Charity is more than donations. It's about partnerships and making change. However, we have learned that money still controls the system and how we behave. If we want to make a difference, we need to change our behaviors around money and power.
The heart of the matter isn't about policies, money, or structures. It's about people and systems of belief. The reasons why we try to do good, and what we even consider as social good, are at the heart of how our system is created, for better or for worse.
Finally, our work matters. This issue is quite broad, and we found this by the number of people who are interested in our work. This system affects real lives and many parts of society, which we've come to appreciate.
The food system is the greatest cause of greenhouse gas emission, biodiversity loss, ecosystem destruction, and freshwater pollution in the world. In Canada, the situation is worrying. Not only we have 58% of food waste, we also have food-related diseases. As a matter of fact, the food system is a system of great extremes and paradoxes. Famine versus obesity, high production versus food waste, and promotion of healthy habits versus subsidies on environmentally damaging farming practices. My name is Geneviève Clément, and I'm a microbiologist and master student in the agri-food sector at the University of Sherbrooke. As a scientist, I'm deeply concerned when we are asked to find new techniques when millennial, sustainable, and scientifically proven method works but are not applied. When a bad habit causes a disease, giving a pill might fix the symptoms, but fixing the lifestyle will fix the problem once and for all. We can do better, can't we? Then, why is it so difficult? To answer this question, I choose to investigate my hometown, Granby, which is situated near Montreal in Canada. Granby offers a wide range of opportunities because of its small size, young population, dynamic, varied density areas, services offered, economic diversity, in addition to its urban growth and configuration. There, I found human-scale solutions applicable rapidly. One of my findings is partnerships. It's exciting because almost no governmental action is needed, and it may include multiple actors, big and small, in the system. This makes the solution much more feasible. Let me explain where this solution came from. Farming is our job financially, mentally, and physically. Facilitating and offering partnerships opportunities is a way to offer financial security and social security to sustainable farmers. Partnerships offer benefits for every participant. It can be between farmers, consumers, business, schools. Partnerships can help enhance accessibility to sustainably made products, and it can be a possibility for educational programs. It may be a great solution for green space valorization through urban farming. In this game, C2 support could mean a great deal if it modifies zoning laws on industrial and commercial land were safe for farming purposes. All in all, partnerships can bring community spirit and solidarity at a new level. System thinking approach is a great tool for mapping interactions. Still, what I have learned from Map the System is not only the usefulness to map these interactions, but the usefulness to look at these interactions with multiple glasses. Depending to which specialist a problem is given, their approach will be different, as will their answers. As I investigated the work of James Clear and Priya Parker, I learned that solutions need to resonate with people and the way they live. Actions towards sustainability need to be obvious, attractive, satisfying, and easy in order to work. Partnerships mean people will gather together. It will help them connect, understand their realities, have empathy, make better products, etc. It's the most human and effective way to raise awareness and make sustainability satisfying, attractive, and obvious. As I explained in my project, I think that's the true reason why sustainable product promotion fails, and that's the reason why I think partnerships is an exciting solution. When I learned that some sustainable solutions were already known but not used, I must confess I was angry. Angry because I thought farmers were picky or wanted to overstep nature's laws. Of course, I was prejudiced and I was wrong. By getting to know them, I understand that they wanted to be more sustainable, but they didn't have the tools, the knowledge, nor the financial resiliency to do so. They are not the problem. The problem is the system. So, before putting on my lab coat again, I knew I needed to contribute transforming the system. It all starts in our own town, no matter how small it is. Thank you.